Hello everyone. China against America. What I'm talking about is the trade war between China and the USA, which is considered the most important economic event throughout these few years. What is actually happening is a bit complicated, especially throughout these few months. The coronavirus outbreak from China and then spreading to the West and to a lot of countries complicated the issue, and a lot of countries blame China as responsible for spreading the virus, and a lot of reparation claims against China were made. But actually, what I'm going to talk to you is about the nature of the Chinese-U.S. conflict. The nature, of course, is trade war, is the fighting for a balanced trade between China and the USA. But as we all know, that a lot of Chinese firms, Chinese factories and companies are either listed in Hong Kong or in the US for foreign money, and a lot of factories are held by foreign investors from Taiwan, from China, from Japan, and from the USA. So the money earned by the Chinese exports are actually not really only earned by the Chinese firms. A lot of foreign exchange or foreign investors are involved in the China trade. So what President Trump emphasized, that China has to be held responsible for the trade deficit and have to pay tariffs to the US customs, is a bit exaggerated and not the economic fact. But anyhow, is his rhetoric. What is actually happening is that China wants to supersede the US and threaten US dominance in the world, either in economics and in security, in warfare, in the security of information, security of commerce. So what is actually happening is that there is trade conflict between each other, and the US wants to impose tariffs from China and making Chinese exports to the US more difficult than before. And on the other hand, US alleged that China has been taking away or even stealing US intellectual properties and trying to invest in top US technical firms like biotech as well as IT and 5Gs. And Huawei is the company being targeted by the USA. So among all these facts, all these things that happened, what we can see is that the US has been nurturing China for about 30 years, pulling China up from a communist locked nation into a rather open trade partners of the West. And in this process, China gets more and more prosperous, and a lot of jobs, a lot of factories were moved from US, Japan, Taiwan, and Hong Kong to China. So China becomes richer, and gradually after entering the WTO, China's GDP and trade force climbed up and then becomes the second most important or the second largest economic power. Now comes the trouble. The trouble is that the superpower, the number one, brings China into the status of number two, and China will definitely supersede the USA in about 5 years, either in economic volume as well as in technical power or even in military power. So what the US is going to say is to stop China, to put China back to its a bit lower status. So the conflict or the paradox is that number one pulls a country to number two and then put it down. And by putting China down, US wants China to open up market. So buy more US goods so that the trade is balanced. Well, that's step one of the trade talk. Step two of the trade talk is that China must open its market in finance, in services, in banking, which means US banks, US investment companies, financial services can enter China. And China must release or must deregulate its regulation on foreign investment so that foreign firms can operate as an independent entity without having partnership with Chinese firms. And in this way, the Chinese market is open and US services can enter China. What we have in this scenario is that the US wants China's demand for goods. China has been selling to the US for a long time, over 3 decades, and now USA wants to sell things back to China. So this is what we call the balance of trade. But the fact is that the Chinese market can't be open, and especially in finance and other service sectors, because it's a rather closed circle of national companies or companies which is listed but actually owned by the state. So in this sense, if the US opens China's market and enter Chinese market, so the competition between foreign firms and national firms of China could be rather fierce, and usually we expect the Chinese players to be down and US or foreign firms will be up. And in this way, the US can buy a lot of shares, a lot of things. And important is timing. How to enter or when to enter the Chinese market. The timing has come now because of the outbreak of the coronavirus, the so-called pandemic. A lot of the countries closed its market, and now China has been starved by less demand in the Western world. The Chinese GDP suffered from drastic drops, which is not precedented since the 1970s. In this sense, China is being forced to open, and share prices, the prices of public facilities, public utilities will be down, and US firms and foreign investors can enter China and buy those things. So that's what happened during an economic recession. So the weird timing is that at the middle course of the US and China conflict, at the beginning of the second round of the trade talk between US and China, the coronavirus breaks out in Wuhan. China used it as a tool or as an excuse to drag the trade deal phase one, saying that I'm suffering from a lot of problems, a lot of unemployment, factory closures, and even city closures, and asked US to forgive. But US denied this kind of excuse. And the US as well as other European countries do the other way around. They shut down cities, shut down factories, ports, airports, etc. And the desire to buy goods or to spend money is put down. So demand has been taken away from the market. And China suffered from about 3 or 4 months of very little factory orders or factory buying bills. So in this sense, the trade balance will be back, but that's not what the US is going to do. What the US is going to do is to sustain its dominance in world trade and in world standard setting. So what we will see in the coming few months is that there will be a very strong and very drastic conflict between US and China. And China will, of course, stand very firmly against US fighting or US claims. But the longer China resists US offers, the tougher the situation will be, because demand has been driven away and China will suffer an economic recession as well. And for China, for communist China, an economic recession is unexperienced. Well, of course, in earlier stage, in the beginning of the 20th century, there is a republic called the Republic of China. They suffered from a depression, and the result is that the republic broke down. So what I'd expect, or what can be expected, is that China will enter into a very tough situation by compounding two things together, by the trade war between US and China, by the coronavirus outbreak taking away the demand from the market. And the two things compounded together will put China into a very weak stage or weak status of negotiation. The US can wait and China can't wait. And the US will exercise more and more pressure by taking away China's trade partners, more and more isolating China. And China will be in a very weak or very bad negotiation position. What I'm talking about, or what the real thing that happens, is that the end or the solution for the US and China trade conflict, trade war, as well as the solution for a long and even very drastic, very hard recession or even depression in the world economy may I just say may, end up in war, just like the conflict between USA and Europe in the 1930s end up in a recession or depression in the US market, and then the solution is the Second World War.